Sarah Martinez had always been different from other girls in her small Texas town. While her classmates spent weekends at the mall or watching movies, she was running 5 miles before dawn or practicing martial arts in her garage. Her neighbors thought she was odd, maybe even a little crazy. They had no idea that this quiet young woman would one day become one of the most elite warriors in the world. The fire started on a Tuesday evening in October. Sarah was driving home from her job at the local diner when she saw the orange glow lighting up the sky. Thick black smoke billowed from the direction of Maple Street, where the old apartment building housed dozens of families, mostly elderly residents, and single mothers with young children. Sarah pulled over and grabbed her phone to call 911, but she could already hear the sirens wailing in the distance. The fire department was on its way, but she could see flames shooting from multiple windows on the second and third floors. The building was going up fast, too fast. She parked her car and ran toward the building. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, watching in horror as the fire consumed the structure. Mrs. Chun, who ran the corner grocery store, was crying and pointing at the third floor. "My grandson," she sobbed. "Tommy is still up there. He was visiting his friend Jake. They're both only 8 years old." Sarah looked around for the fire trucks. She could hear them getting closer, but they weren't there yet. Every second counted in a fire like this. She had learned that during her time in the Navy, though none of these people knew about her military background. To them, she was just the quiet girl who served coffee and burgers at Mickey's Diner. "Which apartment?" Sarah asked Mrs. Chun. "Third floor, apartment 3B. The one with the Superman curtains," Mrs. Chun replied, her voice shaking. Sarah looked up at the building. The flames hadn't reached that window yet, but smoke was pouring out around the edges. The fire was spreading fast, eating through the old wooden structure like a hungry animal. "Someone needs to do something," said Mr. Rodriguez, who lived in the house next door. "Those boys are going to die up there." "The fire department will be here soon," said another neighbor, a woman Sarah didn't recognize. "They'll get them out." But Sarah could see that soon might not be fast enough. The flames were climbing higher, and the smoke was getting thicker. She had seen enough fires during her military service to know that time was running out. "I'm going in," she said quietly. The neighbors stared at her. Mrs. Chun grabbed her arm. "No, honey, you can't. You're just a little girl. You'll die in there." Sarah was 26 years old and had survived 2 tours in Afghanistan. But she understood why Mrs. Chun saw her as just a little girl. Sarah was small, barely 5 feet 4 inches tall, with a slight build that made her look younger than her years. She had learned long ago to use people's underestimation of her to her advantage. "Someone has to try," Sarah said, gently removing Mrs. Chin's hand from her arm. She ran to her car and grabbed the small emergency kit she always kept in her trunk. It contained a flashlight, a knife, rope, and a basic first aid kit. Most people would find it strange that a diner waitress carried such things, but Sarah had never stopped being a soldier, even after leaving the military. By the time she got back to the building, the first fire truck was pulling up. Sarah could see the firefighters jumping out and starting to unpack their equipment, but she knew it would take them several minutes to get their gear ready and assess the situation. Those children didn't have several minutes. Sarah pulled her jacket over her head and ran into the building. The smoke in the stairwell was thick and choking, but it wasn't impassable yet. She had been in worse situations. She remembered crawling through burning buildings in Kabul, searching for enemy fighters while explosions shook the walls around her. She took the stairs 2 at a time, her flashlight cutting through the smoky darkness. On the second floor, she could hear people coughing and crying behind their doors. Some were already evacuating, stumbling down the stairs with their arms full of belongings and their faces covered with wet towels. "Get out," she called to them as she passed. "The fire is spreading fast." When she reached the third floor, the heat was intense. The hallway was filling with smoke, and she could hear the crackle and roar of flames from somewhere nearby. The apartment numbers were hard to see through the haze, but she counted doors until she found 3B. Sarah pounded on the door. "Tommy, Jake, are you in there?" She heard a faint voice from inside, high and scared. "Help us. We can't get out." Sarah tried the doorknob, but it was locked. She could have picked the lock, a skill she had learned during her special operations training, But there wasn't time for finesse. She stepped back and kicked the door hard, right next to the handle. The old door frame splintered, and the door flew open. Inside, the apartment was filling with smoke that was seeping in through the walls and around the windows. Two small boys were huddled together in the far corner of the living room, coughing and crying. One of them, who must have been Tommy, was wearing a Superman t-shirt that matched the curtains his grandmother had mentioned. "It's okay," Sarah said, dropping to her knees so she would be at their eye level. "I'm here to help you." The boys looked at her with wide, frightened eyes. "Are you a firefighter?" asked Jake. "Something like that," Sarah said. "We need to get out of here right now. Can you both walk?" Both boys nodded. Sarah could see that they were scared but not injured. She took off her jacket and tore it in half, giving each boy a piece to hold over his mouth and nose. "Hold this over your face and stay close to me," she instructed. "We're going to walk fast, but don't run unless I tell you to run. Can you do that?" "Yes, ma'am," Tommy said, his voice muffled by the cloth. Sarah led them toward the door, but as they stepped into the hallway, she could see that the situation had gotten much worse in the few minutes she had been inside the apartment. The flames had spread to the hallway, and the smoke was so thick that she could barely see 5 feet in front of her. She remembered her training. Stay low, move fast, don't panic. She crouched down and motioned for the boys to do the same. "We're going to crawl," she said. "Follow me and stay together." They made their way down the hallway on their hands and knees, with Sarah leading the way and frequently looking back to make sure both boys were still behind her. The smoke was getting thicker and the heat was becoming unbearable. When they reached the stairwell, Sarah could see flames licking at the walls on the second floor. The fire had spread faster than she had expected. The wooden stairs were still passable, but she could see that they wouldn't be for much longer. "Now we run," she told the boys. "Hold onto my belt and don't let go." They ran down the stairs as fast as they could, Sarah half carrying Tommy when he stumbled. Behind them, she could hear the roar of the flames getting louder and the sound of wood cracking and falling. Just as they reached the first floor, a burning beam crashed down behind them, blocking the stairway they had just used. If they had been 30 seconds slower, they would have been trapped. Sarah pushed the boys toward the front door, which she could see was still clear. But as they ran across the lobby, she heard something that made her blood run cold. A woman's voice, crying for help from somewhere above them. She got the boys to the door and pushed them outside, where they were immediately surrounded by firefighters and paramedics. Mrs. Chun grabbed Tommy and hugged him tight, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," she said to Sarah. "Thank you for saving them." But Sarah was looking back at the building. She could still hear that woman's voice, faint but desperate, coming from somewhere on the second floor. "There's someone else in there," she told the fire captain, a big man with soot-covered face. "A woman, second floor, I think." The captain looked at the building, which was now almost completely engulfed in flames. "We can't get back in there now," he said. "It's too dangerous. The whole structure is about to collapse." Sarah understood his position. He had a responsibility to his firefighters, and sending them into a building that was about to fall down would be suicide. But she also knew that woman was going to die if someone didn't act fast. "I can get her," Sarah said quietly. The fire captain stared at her. "Lady, you're not a firefighter. You've already done enough. You saved those boys. Don't throw your life away." But Sarah was already walking back toward the building. She had left people behind once before, during her last mission in Afghanistan, and she had promised herself she would never do it again. "Hey," the captain called after her. "You can't go back in there." Sarah ignored him and ran into the building. The lobby was now fully involved in flames, and the heat was like walking into an oven. She could feel it singeing her hair and burning her lungs with every breath. The stairs were mostly gone, destroyed by the falling beam and consumed by fire. But Sarah could see part of the metal fire escape through a broken window. If she could get to it, she might be able to reach the second floor from the outside. She climbed through the window, cutting her arms on the broken glass. The fire escape was hot metal that burned her hands, but it was still solid. She climbed up quickly, her military training taking over. She had done similar climbs under enemy fire, though never with a building burning around her. On the second floor, She could see into several apartments through their windows. Most were empty, their residents having evacuated or been rescued. But in one apartment at the far end of the building, she could see a figure trapped behind a window that appeared to be stuck. Sarah made her way along the fire escape, the metal groaning under her feet, and the heat from the building making it hard to breathe. When she reached the window, she could see a middle-aged woman inside, frantically trying to open the window while smoke poured into her apartment. Sarah pounded on the glass. The woman saw her and tried even harder to open the window, but it was clearly stuck. Sarah could see that the apartment was filling with smoke, and the woman was starting to collapse from smoke inhalation. Using the handle of her knife, Sarah broke the window and cleared away the glass as quickly as she could. She reached inside and grabbed the woman, who was barely conscious. "Can you climb?" Sarah asked her. The woman shook her head weakly. She was too overcome by smoke to move on her own. Sarah looked down at the ground, 3 stories below. The fire trucks had extended their ladder, but it was positioned for the front of the building and couldn't reach their location on the side. She could see firefighters on the ground pointing up at them, but there was nothing they could do to help. Sarah made a quick calculation. The woman was unconscious and couldn't help with the climb down. The fire escape was already weakening from the heat, and Sarah could feel it starting to sway. They had maybe 2 minutes before it would collapse or the fire would reach them. She had been in situations like this before, during her time with the SEALs. Not exactly like this, but close enough. She knew how to improvise under pressure, how to use whatever was available to solve an impossible problem. Sarah looked around and saw a clothesline that ran from this building to the one next door. It was just a thin rope, not designed to hold much weight, but it was their only option. She tied one end of her own rope from her emergency kit to the fire escape and the other end around the woman's waist. Then, she tied herself to the clothesline and prepared to swing across to the neighboring building, carrying the unconscious woman with her. It was insane, and she knew it. The rope might break, the fire escape might collapse, or she might lose her grip, and both of them would fall. But it was their only chance. Sarah took a deep breath, lifted the woman onto her back, and swung out into space. For a moment, they were flying through the air above the crowd of onlookers, suspended by nothing but a thin piece of rope. Sarah could hear people screaming below, but she focused on the window of the neighboring building that was rushing toward them. They crashed through the window of the adjacent building in a shower of glass and landed hard on the floor inside. Sarah rolled to absorb the impact and protect the woman, just as she had been trained to do during parachute landings. The woman was breathing but still unconscious. Sarah quickly checked her for injuries and found that she had some cuts from the glass, but nothing life-threatening. The smoke inhalation was the main concern. Sarah carried the woman down the stairs of the neighboring building and out to the street, where paramedics were waiting. As she handed the woman over to the medical team, she could hear the groaning sound of metal and wood collapsing behind her. She turned to see the fire escape she had just been standing on break away from the burning building and crashed to the ground in a shower of sparks and twisted metal. The crowd that had gathered to watch the fire was staring at her in amazement. She had just saved 3 people from a burning building, including a dramatic rescue that seemed impossible. But instead of staying to accept their thanks and praise, Sarah quietly slipped away from the crowd and walked back to her car. She had learned during her military service that the best operators were the ones who did their job and disappeared, leaving no trace behind. As she drove home, Sarah thought about the events of the evening. She had saved 3 lives, but she had also revealed more of her abilities than she usually liked to. In her small town, word would spread quickly about the diner waitress who had somehow managed to rescue people from a burning building like some kind of action movie hero. She hoped that people would just see it as a lucky amateur who had gotten brave in an emergency. She wasn't ready for anyone to know the truth about her background, about the years she had spent as one of the most elite warriors in the world. Sarah had good reasons for keeping her past secret, reasons that went beyond simple modesty or humility. There were people who might be very interested to know that a former Navy SEAL was living quietly in their small Texas town, people who might not have her best interests at heart. But as she pulled into her driveway and sat in her car for a moment, Sarah realized that her secret might not stay hidden much longer. Too many people had seen what she could do tonight. And in a small town, secrets had a way of coming to light, whether you wanted them to or not. The next morning, Sarah woke up to find reporters camped outside her small house. The story of the dramatic rescue had made the local news, and someone had managed to identify her as the hero of the evening. Her phone was ringing constantly, and when she looked out her window, she could see news vans lining her quiet street. She didn't answer the door or the phone. Instead, she made coffee and sat at her kitchen table, thinking about what to do next. She had worked so hard to build a quiet, anonymous life in this town. She had a job she enjoyed, neighbors who respected her privacy, and a peaceful routine that helped her deal with the memories of war. Now all of that was in jeopardy. Once the media attention died down, she might be able to return to normal. But she had a feeling that this was just the beginning of her problems. Sarah had left the military for good reasons, reasons that had ended. The reporters eventually left after 3 days of getting no response from Sarah. But the attention didn't stop there. The video footage of her rescue had gone viral on social media, shared thousands of times with captions like "real-life superhero" and "mystery woman saves family from fire." Someone had recorded her dramatic swing from the fire escape to the neighboring building on their phone, and the grainy footage made her look like something out of an action movie. Sarah tried to return to her normal routine at Mickey's Diner, but everything had changed. Customers who had barely noticed her before now stared at her with curiosity and admiration. Some asked for autographs or wanted to take selfies with the local hero. Others peppered her with questions about her background and training. "How did you know how to do all that stuff?" asked Betty Morrison, a regular customer who came in every Tuesday for coffee and pie. "My husband was in the Army for 4 years, and he says what you did was impossible without serious training." Sarah poured Betty's coffee and tried to deflect the question with a shrug. "I guess adrenaline makes people do crazy things." But Betty wasn't satisfied with that answer, and neither were the other customers. Word was spreading through town that their quiet little waitress had skills that didn't match her cover story. People were starting to ask uncomfortable questions, and Sarah could feel the walls of her carefully constructed new life beginning to crumble. The situation got worse when Detective Ray Coleman came into the diner on Thursday morning. Coleman was a good cop who had served in the military himself, and Sarah could see the recognition in his eyes when he looked at her. He had the same bearing as the Special Forces guy she had worked with overseas, and she knew he wasn't fooled by her act. "Coffee, Detective?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice casual. "Sure," Coleman said, settling onto a stool at the counter. "And maybe some answers to a few questions." Sarah poured his coffee and waited. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best strategy was to let the other person make the first move. "I've been thinking about that rescue you pulled off," Coleman said, stirring sugar into his coffee. "See, I spent some time in Iraq, worked with some pretty elite units. And what you did at that fire, well, it reminded me of some of the operators I knew over there." Sarah wiped down the counter, buying time. "I don't know what you mean. The way you moved, the way you assessed the situation, the improvised equipment." Coleman took a sip of his coffee and studied her face. "That wasn't luck or adrenaline. That was training. Serious training." Before Sarah could respond, the bell above the diner door chimed, and 3 men in expensive suits walked in. They didn't look like locals, and they definitely didn't look like they were there for Mickey's famous hamburgers. The men took a booth in the back corner, but Sarah could feel them watching her. One of them was typing on his phone, and she caught him taking what looked like pictures of her when he thought she wasn't looking. Detective Coleman noticed them too, and his expression darkened. "Friends of yours?" he asked quietly. "Never seen them before," Sarah replied. But her instincts were screaming that these men were trouble. She had developed a sixth sense for danger during her years in combat, and every alarm bell in her head was going off. One of the men stood up and approached the counter. He was tall and lean with cold eyes that didn't match his friendly smile. "Excuse me, miss. We're reporters from a national magazine. We'd love to talk to you about your heroic rescue." Sarah had dealt with enough actual reporters to know that this man wasn't one. Everything about him screamed military or intelligence, from his posture to the way his eyes constantly scanned the room for threats. "I'm not interested in talking to the press," Sarah said firmly. "You'll need to leave." The man's smile didn't waver, but his eyes got colder. We're prepared to pay quite well for an exclusive interview. We're particularly interested in learning about your background, your training. Our readers would love to know how an ordinary waitress became such an extraordinary hero. Sarah felt Detective Coleman tense beside her. The cop's hand had moved closer to his service weapon, and she could tell he was picking up the same dangerous vibes from these men. The lady said she's not interested, Coleman said, his voice carrying the authority of his badge. Maybe you gentlemen should finish your coffee and move along. The man looked at Coleman with annoyance, as if the detective was an inconvenience he hadn't planned for. This is a private conversation between journalists and a public figure. And I'm telling you it's over, Coleman replied, standing up from his stool. You can leave voluntarily, or I can help you leave. Your choice. For a moment, the tension in the diner was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah could see the other two men in the booth preparing to stand, and she quickly calculated distances and angles, ready to act if this escalated into violence. But, after a long moment, the fake reporter smiled again and nodded. Of course, officer. We'll be in touch, Miss Martinez. The fact that he knew her last name, which hadn't been released to the media, confirmed Sarah's suspicions that these men were definitely not reporters. They left the diner, but she could see them sitting in a black SUV across the street, watching the building. Who the hell were those guys? Coleman asked as soon as they were gone. I honestly don't know, Sarah replied, though she had a few educated guesses. But they weren't reporters. Coleman looked out the window at the SUV. No kidding. That was either federal or private military contractors. Maybe both. He turned back to Sarah. Look, I don't know what your story is, but I can tell you're not just some waitress who got lucky. And whatever those guys wanted, it wasn't an interview. Sarah appreciated Coleman's directness, but she also knew that telling him the truth would put him in danger. The less he knew, the safer he would be. I can handle myself, she said. I'm sure you can, Coleman replied. But maybe you shouldn't have to handle it alone. If you want to tell me what's really going on, maybe I can help. Before Sarah could respond, her phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she recognized but hadn't seen in over 2 years. Her former commanding officer, Captain James Mitchell. I have to take this, she told Coleman, stepping into the kitchen for privacy. Sarah, Mitchell's voice was tense. We need to talk. I thought we agreed that I was done with all this, Sarah said, keeping her voice low. That was before you became a viral sensation, Mitchell replied. Do you have any idea how many people are looking for you right now? Sarah looked out the kitchen window and saw that the black SUV had been joined by 2 more vehicles. I'm getting the idea. Listen carefully, Mitchell said. You need to get out of there now. There are at least 3 different groups trying to track you down, and not all of them are friendly. Some very bad people think you might be useful to them, and others think you know too much to be left alone. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This was exactly what she had been afraid of when she left the military. The operations she had been involved in had made her enemies, powerful people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate her if they felt threatened. What do you suggest? She asked. There's a safe house in Austin. I can have a team pick you up in 2 hours. No, Sarah said firmly. I'm done running operations. I just want to live a normal life. That's not an option anymore, Mitchell replied. The moment you swung across that rope on live television, your normal life ended. These people aren't going to just forget about you. Sarah knew he was right, but the thought of going back into hiding, of losing the small measure of peace she had found in this town, made her feel sick. There has to be another way, she said. Maybe, Mitchell said, but first you need to stay alive long enough to find it. Get out of that diner, find somewhere safe, and call me back in an hour. The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone for a moment, then walked back into the main dining room. Coleman was still at the counter, and she could see more vehicles gathering outside. We need to go, she told the detective. Right now. Coleman didn't ask questions. He could see the urgency in her face and the growing number of suspicious vehicles outside. My car's out back. We can slip out through the kitchen. As they made their way toward the rear exit, Sarah heard the front door of the diner chime again. She glanced back and saw 4 men in tactical gear entering, their hands inside their jackets in a way that suggested they were armed. Move, she hissed to Coleman. They slipped out the back door just as Sarah heard one of the men call her name. Coleman's police cruiser was parked behind the diner, and they quickly got inside. Where to? Coleman asked, starting the engine. Anywhere but here, Sarah replied, watching in the side mirror as the men emerged from the back of the diner. One of them was speaking rapidly into a radio. Coleman pulled out of the alley and onto Main Street, driving casually to avoid attracting attention. But Sarah could see at least 6 different vehicles beginning to follow them at a discreet distance. Okay, Coleman said as they drove through downtown. I think it's time you told me what's going on. I've got half the intelligence community converging on my town, and they all seem very interested in my favorite waitress. Sarah took a deep breath. She had kept her secret for 2 years, but now it seemed that the truth was going to come out whether she wanted it to or not. And Detective Coleman had already put himself at risk by helping her escape. My name is Sarah Martinez, she began. But that's about the only true thing most people in this town know about me. Coleman glanced at her in the rearview mirror, his expression encouraging her to continue. I spent 8 years in the Navy, Sarah said. The last 4 of those years, I was a SEAL. Coleman's eyebrows went up, but he didn't seem entirely surprised. I figured it was something like that. SEALs don't usually become waitresses, though. It's complicated, Sarah said. The missions I was involved in, the operations, some of them were highly classified, and some of them made enemies of very powerful people. What kind of operations? Sarah hesitated. Even now, even with her life in danger, she was reluctant to reveal details that were supposed to remain classified forever. Counterterrorism, she said finally. Mostly in Afghanistan and Iraq, but some other places too. We did things that officially never happened. Coleman nodded grimly. And now someone thinks you know too much. Maybe. Or maybe they think I could be useful to them. Or maybe they just want revenge for something that happened overseas. Sarah watched the cars following them, counting at least 8 vehicles now. The point is, I left that world behind for a reason. I just wanted to disappear and live quietly. Well, you picked the wrong week to be a hero, Coleman said dryly. They had reached the edge of town, and Coleman was driving toward the state highway. But Sarah could see that their pursuers were getting bolder, closing the distance between their vehicles. We're not going to lose them in a police cruiser, Sarah observed. I know, Coleman replied. But I've got backup coming. As if on cue, Sarah saw flashing lights in the distance. 3 more police cars were approaching from the opposite direction, and she could hear the sound of a helicopter overhead. You called for help? She asked. The moment I saw those guys in the diner, Coleman said. I've got friends in the Texas Rangers and the FBI. When unknown armed men start converging on my town looking for one of my residents, I take that personally. The police cars formed a roadblock ahead of them, and Coleman pulled over. Federal agents in tactical gear emerged from the vehicles, establishing a perimeter around Coleman's cruiser. Sarah tensed, ready to run or fight if necessary. But Coleman held up his hand. It's okay, he said. These are the good guys. A woman in an FBI jacket approached the car. She was tall and professional-looking, with the kind of bearing that suggested serious authority. Agent Rebecca Torres, FBI, she said, showing her badge. Ms. Martinez, we need to talk. Sarah looked at Coleman, who nodded encouragingly. She got out of the police car and found herself surrounded by a dozen armed federal agents. We know who you are, Agent Torres said without preamble. And we know why those people are after you. We're prepared to offer you protection, but we need your cooperation. What kind of cooperation? Sarah asked warily. There's a situation developing, Torres explained. Something that requires your particular skills. Help us, and we'll make sure you can go back to your quiet life when it's over. Sarah looked back at the town she had called home for 2 years, now barely visible in the distance. She could see smoke rising from several locations, and she realized that the people looking for her weren't being subtle about their search. What kind of situation? She asked. Agent Torres looked around at the assembled law enforcement officers, then back at Sarah. The kind that could get a lot of innocent people killed if we don't handle it right. The kind that needs someone with your background and abilities. Sarah closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She had tried to leave this world behind, tried to become someone else. But it seemed that no matter how far she ran or how well she hid, her past was going to keep catching up with her. What do you need me to do? She asked. The FBI safe house was located in a nondescript suburb outside Austin, the kind of place where neighbors minded their own business and didn't ask too many questions. Sarah sat in the briefing room, studying the files that Agent Torres had spread across the table. What she saw made her blood run cold. Victor Kozlov, Torres said, pointing to a photograph of a man with dead eyes and scars across his neck. Former Spetsnaz, now runs one of the most dangerous mercenary groups in the world. He's been hired to eliminate a federal witness who's scheduled to testify next week. Sarah studied the photo. She recognized Kozlov, though they had never met face to face. His reputation in the special operations community was legendary and terrifying. He was known for taking contracts that other mercenaries wouldn't touch, missions that required not just killing but sending a message through extreme violence. "Who's the witness?" Sarah asked. Torres slid another file across the table. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a former biochemist for a major pharmaceutical company. She discovered that her employers were deliberately contaminating water supplies in developing countries to test experimental drugs on unwitting populations. When she tried to blow the whistle, they tried to have her killed. She's been in witness protection for 6 months. Sarah looked at the photo of Dr. Vasquez, a small woman in her 50s with kind eyes and graying hair. She looked like someone's grandmother, not someone who would pose a threat to powerful corporations. "What's Kozlov's connection to this?" Sarah asked. "The pharmaceutical company has ties to several international criminal organizations," Torres explained. "They hired Kozlov to eliminate Dr. Vasquez before she can testify. And he's not just planning to kill her. He wants to make an example of her, to show other potential whistleblowers what happens when you cross these people." Sarah flipped through the file, reading reports from intelligence sources around the world. Kozlov had assembled a team of 12 operatives, all of them experienced killers. They had entered the United States 2 weeks ago using false identities and had been systematically gathering intelligence on Dr. Vasquez's protection detail. "Where is she being held?" Sarah asked. "Federal courthouse in Houston," Torres replied. "She's scheduled to testify on Monday, which gives us 3 days to stop Kozlov." Sarah studied the building plans that Torres had included in the file. The courthouse was a fortress with multiple layers of security and dozens of federal marshals providing protection. But Sarah knew that if Kozlov had gotten this far, he must have a plan to get through those defenses. "Why me?" Sarah asked. "You have FBI tactical teams, federal marshals, local SWAT. Why do you need a former SEAL who's been out of the game for 2 years?" Torres was quiet for a moment, and Sarah could see her weighing how much to reveal. "Because you're the only person alive who's ever faced Kozlov in combat and survived," Torres said finally. Sarah felt like she had been punched in the stomach. Memories came flooding back, memories she had tried hard to suppress. Afghanistan, 3 years ago, a mission that had gone wrong in the worst possible way. "Operation Desert Rose," Sarah said quietly. Torres nodded. "You were part of the team sent to eliminate a terrorist cell that was planning attacks on American embassies. But the intelligence was bad. It wasn't a terrorist cell. It was a trap," Sarah continued, the words tasting bitter in her mouth. "Kozlov was there, leading a group of mercenaries hired by the same people the terrorists were working for. He knew we were coming." Sarah remembered that night in perfect, horrible detail. Her team had been ambushed while raiding what they thought was a terrorist safe house. Instead, they had walked into a carefully planned killing zone. 7 of America's best special operations soldiers had died in less than 10 minutes. "You were the only one who made it out," Torres said gently. "And, according to the classified reports, you wounded Kozlov before you escaped." Sarah touched her left shoulder unconsciously. She still had scars from that night, both physical and psychological. The guilt of being the sole survivor had been part of what drove her to leave the military and try to disappear. "Those scars on his neck in the photo," Sarah said. "Those are from me. We think that's why he's interested in you now," Torres explained. "When your rescue video went viral, someone recognized you and passed the information to Kozlov. Our sources say he's obsessed with finishing what he started in Afghanistan." Sarah closed the files and leaned back in her chair. This was her worst nightmare come true. Not only was her cover blown, but her past had literally come back to kill her. "So what's the plan?" she asked. "We want you to help us protect Dr. Vasquez," Torres said. "Your experience fighting Kozlov gives you insights that our other agents don't have. You know how he thinks, how he operates. And you want to use me as bait, Sarah added. It wasn't a question. Torres didn't deny it. Kozlov wants you dead. If we can convince him that you're part of the protection detail, he might make mistakes trying to get to you. Mistakes we can exploit to stop his attack. Sarah understood the logic, but she also understood the risks. Kozlov was a master tactician who rarely made mistakes. Using herself as bait would be extremely dangerous, not just for her but for everyone around her. What about the people in my town? Sarah asked. The ones who try to help me? They're under protection, Torres assured her. We've got agents watching Detective Coleman and the families you saved from the fire. Kozlov knows better than to go after civilians when he has a chance at his real target. Sarah studied the agent's face, looking for any sign of deception. Torres seemed sincere, but Sarah had learned not to trust anyone completely. I want to talk to Dr. Vasquez before I decide, Sarah said. Torres nodded. She's here, actually. She wanted to meet the person who might be risking her life to protect her. A few minutes later, Torres led Sarah to another room in the safe house. Dr. Elena Vasquez was sitting at a small table, reading a medical journal. When Sarah entered, the older woman looked up with intelligent, compassionate eyes. You must be Sarah, Dr. Vasquez said, standing and extending her hand. Agent Torres told me about your situation. I'm sorry that helping me has put you in danger. Sarah shook the doctor's hand and was surprised by the strength of her grip. This woman might look like a grandmother, but there was steel beneath her gentle exterior. Tell me about what you discovered, Sarah said, taking a seat across from Dr. Vasquez. For the next hour, Dr. Vasquez explained how she had uncovered her former employer's horrific experiments. They had been deliberately introducing contaminated water supplies to villages in Africa and South America, then studying the effects of various drugs on the resulting illnesses. Thousands of people died, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice steady but her eyes filled with pain. Children mostly. And it was all for profit, to test drugs that they could then sell at enormous markups to wealthy countries. Sarah felt anger building in her chest. She had seen enough innocent suffering during her military service, and the thought that people would deliberately cause such harm for money made her sick. They offered me $20 million to keep quiet, Dr. Vasquez continued. When I refused, they tried to have me killed. The FBI saved my life, but only my testimony can stop them from doing this again. And you're willing to risk your life to testify? Dr. Vasquez smiled sadly. I'm 62 years old, Agent Martinez. I don't have children or grandchildren. If my death can prevent more innocent people from suffering, then it's a trade I'm willing to make. Sarah looked into the older woman's eyes and saw the same kind of determination she had seen in fellow soldiers who were willing to sacrifice everything for their mission. Dr. Vasquez wasn't just a witness. She was a warrior in her own way. What happens if you don't testify? Sarah asked. The pharmaceutical company gets away with murder, Dr. Vasquez replied simply. They'll destroy the evidence, transfer their operations to new locations, and thousands more people will die. My testimony is the only thing that can stop them. Sarah made her decision. I'll help protect you. Dr. Vasquez reached across the table and squeezed Sarah's hand. Thank you. But I need you to understand something. If it comes down to a choice between your life and completing my testimony, I want you to save yourself. Too many good people have already died because of this. Sarah smiled at the older woman's concern, but she had no intention of abandoning her mission. She had left her team behind once before, and the guilt had nearly destroyed her. She wouldn't make that mistake again. Over the next 2 days, Sarah worked with the FBI to plan Dr. Vasquez's protection during her testimony. The courthouse was indeed a fortress, but Sarah could see several potential weaknesses in their security plan. Kozlov was too good to try a direct assault. He would look for more subtle ways to complete his mission. Sarah studied building plans, security protocols, and personnel files. She walked through the courthouse multiple times, memorizing every entrance, exit, and potential hiding spot. She also reviewed everything they knew about Kozlov's team and their methods. On Sunday night, the evening before Dr. Vasquez was scheduled to testify, Sarah was reviewing the security plan one final time when Agent Torres approached her. We've got a problem, Torres said, holding up her phone. Kozlov just posted a video on the dark web. Sarah watched as Torres played the video. Kozlov appeared on screen, sitting in what looked like an empty warehouse. The scars on his neck were clearly visible, and his cold eyes stared directly into the camera. "Hello, Sarah Martinez," he said in accented English. "I was very pleased to see your heroic performance on the news. It reminded me that we have unfinished business." Kozlov smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Tomorrow, I will complete my contract to eliminate Dr. Vasquez. But you have given me an opportunity to settle a personal debt as well. I know you are protecting her. I know you think you can stop me." The mercenary leaned forward, his scarred face filling the screen. "I promise you this. Tomorrow, both you and the doctor will die. And this time, you will not escape to tell the tale." The video ended. Sarah stared at the black screen for a moment, then looked up at Torres. "How many people know I'm here?" Sarah asked. "Besides the agents in this room?" "Maybe a dozen people in the bureau," Torres replied. "Why?" "Because Kozlov just confirmed that he knows I'm part of the protection detail," Sarah said. "That means either we have a leak, or he's got better intelligence sources than we thought." Torres looked troubled. "What do you think?" Sarah considered the possibilities. In her experience, when operations went wrong, it was usually because someone on the inside had been compromised. But there were other explanations. "Maybe both," Sarah said. "But it doesn't change our plan. We protect Dr. Vasquez, and we stop Kozlov. Even though he's specifically targeting you." Sarah thought about the people who had died in Afghanistan, about Dr. Vasquez's determination to testify despite the danger, about the innocent civilians who would die if the pharmaceutical company wasn't stopped. "Especially because he's targeting me," Sarah replied. "This isn't just about the mission anymore. It's personal." Torres nodded. "Then, we'd better make sure we're ready for him." Sarah spent the rest of the night preparing her equipment and reviewing the plan. She cleaned and checked her weapons, studied the building plans one more time, and went through mental exercises to prepare herself for combat. As dawn approached, Sarah found herself thinking about the fire that had started this whole chain of events. If she had just driven past that burning building, if she had let someone else be the hero, her cover would never have been blown. She would still be safely anonymous, serving coffee and burgers in her small town. But she also thought about Tommy and Jake, the two boys she had saved from that fire. They were alive because she had acted. Dr. Vasquez would have a chance to testify and prevent more deaths because Sarah was willing to put herself at risk. Maybe hiding from her past had been the wrong choice all along. Maybe it was time to stop running from who she really was and start using her abilities to make a difference again. Sarah checked her watch. In 6 hours, Dr. Vasquez would begin her testimony. And somewhere in Houston, Viktor Kozlov was preparing for what he believed would be their final confrontation. Sarah had spent 2 years trying to forget how to be a warrior. But as she prepared for the coming battle, she could feel her instincts and training reasserting themselves. The quiet waitress was gone. In her place was a Navy SEAL, ready to complete her mission or die trying. The sun was rising over Houston, and Sarah Martinez was going back to war. Agent Torres smiled for the first time since introducing herself. "First, we need to get you somewhere safe. Then, we'll brief you on the mission." As Sarah got into the FBI vehicle, she looked back one more time at the small town where she had been happy, at least for a while. Detective Coleman gave her a small salute from beside his police car. "Don't worry," Agent Torres said, following her gaze. "We'll make sure your town is protected. And when this is over, you can come back if you want to." Sarah nodded, but she had a feeling that her quiet life as a small-town waitress was over forever. Whether she wanted it or not, she was about to become a soldier again. And somewhere in the back of her mind, despite all her efforts to suppress it, she felt a familiar excitement beginning to build. She had missed the sense of purpose that came with missions that mattered. Maybe it was time to stop running from who she really was. Nothing to do with lack of courage or commitment to service. She had seen too much, done too much, and lost too many good people. When she finally got out, she had wanted nothing more than to disappear and live a quiet life where no one expected her to be a hero. But it seemed that being a hero was something she couldn't escape, even when she tried to hide from it. And now, whether she liked it or not, People were going to start asking questions about how a small-town waitress had managed to pull off rescues that would challenge even experienced firefighters. Sarah finished her coffee and went to take a shower. Whatever happened next, she would face it the same way she had faced everything else in her life, with courage, determination, and the skills that had been forged in the crucible of combat. She just hoped that her past would stay buried long enough for her to figure out how to handle her suddenly, very public present. Outside, the reporters were getting more persistent, knocking on her door and calling her name. Sarah ignored them and began planning her next move. She had survived Taliban ambushes, IED explosions, and missions that were classified so highly that most people would never know they had happened. She could certainly handle a few small-town reporters, and whatever consequences came from one night of heroism. At least, she hoped she could.